For the first several hundred activations, I didn't even realize I was being teleported across space. Each time I was bounced from disintegrator to integrator, through the thin skin of the telepod, then a cinder block partition, and across the laboratory to the other telepod. There was an electric whine and a burst of light, like a migraine throb. The same nondescript concavity would be there when the black spots cleared from my eyes, so it didn't cross my mind that I had moved anywhere at all. The next activation followed almost immediately. It was while I was dead when I first realized there were two separate and identical telepod compartments. So the next time I was alive, I picked a booger from my nose and wiped it on the eggish wall of the pod without really remembering the origins of the impulse. See, the living don't typically remember dead things. Then, with each activation, I bounced between the pod with the booger and the one without. But by the time I had already figured this out, it was already too late for me to ever see heaven. I had only signed up for clinical research, sponsored by an organization with a long acronym that had given me the impression that I was going to be subjected to something psychological. Though they weren't the only ones being deceptive. I mean, I applied with a student ID I found on the ground outside the city campus dining hall. I had been desperate. I was about to lose my home, and I had already made rent with too many other clinical drug tests to be at all viable as a research patient under my own name. And yes, by the way, I have seen many grotesque side effects. I didn't know this at the time, of course, since it was, and is, a closely guarded secret, but teleportation technology is remarkably mature. By the time they brought me in as a test subject, no one was getting turned inside out anymore. I have since heard about some of the more exotic early catastrophes from a sympathetic someone within the project. Care to guess how long you can still scream after the skin of your entire body has been replaced with the flannel from your shirt? Or how many were still conscious in the tangle created by the first mass transport? No. When they brought me in, the technology had worked perfectly, and everybody involved was ready to change the world. From their perspective, I was less like an at-risk test subject, and more like the guy who had to come in and press the button on a new phone for 12 hours straight to prove its clickability. Which also meant that I was already too late to stop. As far as they're concerned, too much has already been invested. The teleporters are coming. So, I'm not sure what anybody ever found confusing about this, but let me go ahead and clear it up right now. When a teleporter destroys you to make a copy of you somewhere else, you die. I've heard that's a debatable philosophical point, but it sounds kind of obvious, doesn't it? And while everybody is busy arguing whether or not Star Trek characters are dying every time they beam up or down, they're forgetting to ask the next question. What happens to people who die over and over? What's worse, though, is ignoring the whole death component of the disintegrator-integrator teleportation because your new technology works and is going to make you very, very rich. I'm afraid that the people who did this to me will ignore everything I told them. They'll even ignore their own eyes because I know they saw the formless anarchs, the semi-souls of pandemonium, tumble out of the telepod after me. And they saw the expression on my face which had encoded its pain and the prospect of infinite horror. But I'm jumping ahead. The thing you need to understand first is that you are not just your life. The act of being born, living, and dying accomplishes more than just the opening and closing of your experiences. It also enfolds a space, like a bubble sealing itself off a wand at the moment of your death, with the shimmering surface of life encircling in that instant a vaster interior. In dying, you've completed a ritual of enclosure, capturing and taming a portion of the formless chaos that surrounds and dwarfs the material universe. That interior is you, too. Your real body is little more than an appendage to this full state of being. When you're not living, you are that space, and you're free to make whatever you can imagine of it, with the wisdom and experiences of your life shaping the material of your immortal being. It's not an afterlife, it's your fulfillment. But I'm not here to give you a tour of what happens after your death. For instance, we haven't even touched on how your afterworld connects to your loved ones from life. I'm here to provide a warning. Because the worst horror you can experience on Earth could not possibly capture the totality of the cosmos of fear awaiting me when I die next. So we've established, you teleport, you die. But it isn't a new being, albeit one that's just like you in every way, that's being born in the other telepod. No. It's just you again. Your existence on Earth can be fully captured in a stream of information, so it's also fully you that's recalled on the integrator telepod. But the teleporter has unzipped that perfect enfolding seal created by the birth, life, death cycle. Every time you disintegrate and die, it's resealed in a different place. It's like getting a bunch of new belly buttons, with each one forming a weak spot in your protection against the outside. It's at these vulnerable points that the anarchs get in. Describing all of this is especially frustrating when I don't have access to the knowledge I do when I'm dead. See, from that vantage, there would be no doubt in your mind. If you wanted the explanation involving muons and gluons or whatever, I could provide. Because when you're not alive, all knowledge is as easily seen as the continents from space. But I worry I'm getting a little abstract, so I'll return to what happened here, on Earth. I first entered into a room of bored technicians, not engineers. So bored, and so certain that they were working with a foregone technological conclusion that they didn't even bother to tell me their plan to teleport me thousands of times, every 10 seconds for 8 hours. I didn't even have to change out of my clothes or wash my hands once I signed in and filled out some forms. A woman in a hoodie led me through several keycard doors into a bare, cinder block room with a telepod. It looked kinda like a big Bluetooth speaker in the center of the floor, with a single bundle of cables held together in red Velcro bands. There also weren't any buttons, just a door that opened into an ovoid space. I was directed to stand or sit in the telepod. Then the woman in the hoodie described how I'd see flashing lights and hear a noise. Afterwards, we'll ask you some questions. Did I have to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water? It was best to start now, she said. Then she sealed me in. And though I couldn't see it, there was a speaker somewhere in the telepod. I had discovered this from hearing the voice of a bored man saying, "Are you ready for activation?" There was no way I could have known, but saying yes was consenting to my own damnation. When I first died, I encountered nothing. This void was, in reality, my space, withheld and safeguarded from chaos. But your fullest expression doesn't come with an instruction manual, and the only path I saw before me was through the lamp pike beacon of the integrator. I walked through and lived again on the other telepod. There is no memory carried across from death, no time has passed. Subjective and objective teleportation, at least, at first. The mechanics of the time-to-time interface are complicated, but I technically could have emerged at any future integrator incident, or even started my life from birth, but it wouldn't matter to my living experience, which retained its linearity. I passed through the afterworld dozens of more times before I began to see the light from my previous passages. The paths my psyche had created through uncreated space, and the strewn Philly cheesesteaks, birthed of a stray thought. I created more and stayed longer, ignoring the persistent pull from the next return to the integrator. Troubling signs manifested here, long before I felt them in my 10-second lives. In life, I was getting bored with the telepod. A bright flash of light in an otherwise sensory-deprived place is irritating at first, but soon becomes as regular as the flicker in the office fluorescence. There was some brief excitement before I used the boogers to discover I was teleporting and started banging on the pod door, but they pulled me out, showed me a slick commercial, and offered me $32,000 to get back in. I told myself I was teleporting, but there wasn't the slightest sense of disorientation, not even nausea. Instead, the light flashed every 10 seconds. That's it. But then I shivered at activation 504. I just felt a chill, I said. An intercom line opened.
We anticipated this,
the bored voice said.
The air you're displacing is just condensing around you, so you might feel a little clammy over the next hour.
It was much worse than clammy, but it's hard to ignore the diagnosis of a voice that's bored with teleportation, so I tolerated my increasing discomfort far longer than I should have. I didn't know it yet, but I was standing in the heart of a haunted house, the cold spot. My breath came out as a sticking mist which clung to me and bounced on my shivering shoulders, like I was a cold ocean draped in fog.
Mist is also something we expect,
the bored voice said, before I had said a word. The mist, is it normal to see things in it? Faces? I asked. The face was gone, but then there was another. Then it was gone too, stretched away before I could read anything in the expression, or even believe myself.
It's called pareidolia,
the bored voice said. Eventually, I couldn't see the walls of the telepod chamber through the mist. Fully enveloped, the fog filled with ghostly shapes which came together like wobbling tesseracts before pulling apart and reforming. 20-fingered hands made swirling patterns of runny faces as fog-made amoeboids decayed back into the mist. I'm hallucinating, I said, at first barely above a whisper, then panicked. I'm hallucinating! The teleporting light missed a beat.
Do you want to take a break?
A woman's voice said, in a way that indicated a break would be really annoying. I took my time, responded, and waved away as much of the fog as I could with my shivering hands.
Sir,
the woman said, but she didn't wait for an answer, and with the line still open said,
proceed.
I heard someone in the background say something along the lines of,
Director, sensors show anomalous mass beyond...
I endured more activations, the whole time rubbing my cold arms with my hands and thinking of that $3,200. The fog shapes took on a membranous sheen like jellyfish, and then I saw hundreds of eyes open at me, each from a closed lid of fog, but now fully real in yellow, bloodshot red, and dazzling white. I slammed my own eyes shut. I thought it was the most I would have to endure, and I had no way of knowing that the horrible things I shut out from my senses were only the side effect of an apocalypse in my afterlife. With each new teleportation death, a hole was being pinched in my bubble, through which oozed the swirling, chaotic potential of the outside ultraverse, encountering the substance of my afterworld, the essence of nothing created of itself being, and beings. Like all beings, they wanted, but having no biological needs, they wanted purely. When the first of them clambered down into my reality, I was agog. It had taken on an aspect of pure light, having seen it and wanting. This anarch, like most of them, took familiar form, taking on arms, legs, and a head, but to grotesque proportions and without definition, organs, or sensory apparatus. They poured into my beautiful lands with chaotic surfaces and nauseating colors churning on their faces. I called them anarchs, but the D word is there if you prefer. If anything, they're worse. At least hell and its demons have a purpose. I teleported back and forth from one side to the other of the cinder block wall, perforating my afterworld without knowing it. Each time I died was like emerging from the same cave again, into my blasted world, and feeling simultaneously the sudden shock of remembrance and horror at what I had lost. My infinity became a gray crater, teeming with mindless, hungry parodies of human forms. The anarchs fell upon the substance of my fulfillment whenever possible, shoving my creations into themselves with limbs bristling with molars. More and more of the anarchs poured in, until I was jostled by them on all sides in a churning pool of rapacious non-things which ate at me without enjoying or digested. By my 500th jump, my afterlife was so crowded that they clung to me as I was returned to life on the integrator pad, their barely bodies struggling in the stale air of the telepod and dispersing into wisps, which were growing more solid with each activation. Eventually they began to whisper. I opened my eyes and saw the floating pupils replaced with mouths, which spoke out of sync with themselves at first. It was just phoneme snippets, but there were soon words and sentences, some repeated, others scrambled, but all empty of any understanding. They were mimics. And in a dreadful realization, I recognized the voice they were mimicking as my own. Understanding followed fast, with each word carried across the chasm between me and my afterworld. Terrible realizations broke open inside my living mind. I don't know how many aeons in death I spent embossing just the right words on the formless anarchs, but the terror of that crowded infinitude must have seared on my soul something that survived into life, because their echoing primed me to remember the invaders and their unbiology. Overwhelmed with this terrible knowledge, suddenly aware of my afterlife's ruin, I wailed and threw myself against the inside of the telepod. I shrieked and thrashed like an animal. The next activation didn't come. Instead of a voice over the intercom, 2 technicians tore open the door and watched me tumble out in a cloud of malformed fingers, drooping mouths, and gelatinous pseudo-human shapes, which splattered across the tile floor of the laboratory and evaporated in a blast of stinking green-yellow steam. Even with my face against the cold floor, with my heart beating inside my shallow breaths, and my mind locked on the end of all hope, I remember feeling dimly satisfied that the man with the bored voice was screaming. The scientist with the hoodie conducted my next interview at a desk by a window that overlooked a traditional campus quad. She was shaken and took careful notes of my scattered utterings. I kept looking out the window at the green and sunlit world. We are each meant to create our own paradises, but the teleporter ensured I never would. I was too shaken to convince anybody, but I don't know if it would have made a difference anyway, because a woman with an immense smile interrupted to introduce herself as the laboratory's director and to dismiss her Green Guild subordinate. She handed me a check and told me I was lucky to get it. There wasn't any point recording my responses further since I didn't complete the trial, most likely due to my undiagnosed claustrophobia, she said. She also said that she knew I wasn't a student here. I'm sure I sounded crazy, but I don't think they were ever going to listen. I mean, who would expect that a teleporter works perfectly, except for the slow damage it does to an afterlife that's unlike any that they might believe in? But I can warn you. Don't be too clever to believe me, because whenever these teleporters are unveiled to the public, you will hear voices much louder than mine tell you that they are safe. You will see videos demoing the technology on your favorite sites. Bill Gates or some other celebrity will go through a teleporter. There will be videos of cute animals reacting. The teleporters will be convenient, and eventually, they will be everywhere. You will be tempted to forget my words, but you must listen to me. No matter what you do, don't go into a teleporter. Yes, it will kill you, but that's not even close to the worst part. The worst part is, the teleporters will make your life a hiding place from the full existence meant for you. And when I die, hopefully many, many years from now, I know the decision I'm gonna make. To return to live again from birth and forget. At least for those years before I stepped into the teleporter, about the consuming hunger awaiting me in the afterworld. With the invasive semi-soul anarchs, death will have nothing to offer. Instead, it will drive me out. Back into life. I have only the choice between the roiling, consuming chaos that has overflowed my afterworld, or returning eternally here to avoid it. I will only ever live, wearing ruts through this same handful of years, because unlike all of you, I'm now denied of anything beyond this. The same could happen to you, so unless you want to see horrors far beyond the scope of the life you know, don't use the teleporters. They will turn your life into a prison, and you will soon enough discover that you are like a disgraced king or queen, forced to die endlessly in exile from your promised land.